From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. After more than 4 decades in news covering everything from crooked politicians to alleged sea monsters, Sean Daly hung up the microphone for the final time last month, capping off a rich broadcasting career that was full of memorable moments.
Is the irony lost on anybody in this room that we're discussing fire safety and the sign here says not to exceed 35 people?
Chief, tell me what you're thinking. Show me the papers.
Why are you any different from anybody else who stood in front of a podium and told us stuff that never happened? The question's everything. Are you concerned? Because the question gets to the answers. Can we speak with you for a second? Mr. Moreau, are you ashamed of your criminal conduct? I'm wondering if these are the right questions.
Some reporters don't listen to the answers. It's an amazing thing, but it's true, isn't it?
Why is gasoline not a problem? It is true, and they're making a big mistake. 2 cans of gasoline right inside a building. You listen, but then you have to follow it up. This doesn't look right to me. You would possibly die?
Well, I thought about the death.
Over crackers?
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about the crackers at the time.
What?
That is just a small part of a great street story piece done by Walt Buteau here to my right and his photographer, John Villala. You can catch it online, WPRI.com. Also joining me on the panel, as always, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and our guest, the great Sean Daly. Sean, it's weird having you in studio. You're kind of an outside cat, not an in-the-house cat, you know.
Road dog.
There is one question.
Should we do the lightning round first with Sean? Yes or no question?
Yeah, maybe we should.
We may be the only one to get through this.
Yeah.
There is one question that I always get from people when, oh, you work at Channel 12. Is Sean Daly really like that?
What does that mean exactly?
And I usually,
yes.
Yeah, and the answer is yes. Or I ask them, well, what do you think? You know, but my answer always is yes on that. That's him. That's the guy.
And I think it's true for all of us, actually. We are who we are, especially if you've been on as long as we've all been on. There's no hiding. The camera never blinks.
Yeah. Why did you decide to stop stepping in front of the camera?
It's harder than it looks. People keep thinking all you do is talk on TV. Well, not really. There's a little more to it than that. And 42 years is enough. And there's other stuff out there. I'm not sure exactly what. I tried to think that I could maybe figure that out while I was working, and then I kind of realized, you know what? You need to take a break. You've been at this literally since age 17 full-time. That's how I ended up going to college. I worked full-time at NBC and part-time for college. They paid. This was when companies were different. And so 42 years as a full-time worker, add it up. You're probably, what, only halfway there?
and we talked about this. I asked you during the interview for that story, and you said you have a lot left in the tank. But we also talked about the pressure that people don't realize that is out there, right? I mean, you can do a great story, but the next day, whether it's from your editor or even from the viewer, you've got to come up with another unique angle. And it's not always easy covering some of the things that you had to cover.
The next day? How about the next show? You could have a bad noon and a great dinner time, or a great noon and a terrible dinner time. All in one day.
It's hard. It's what people don't see.
They never see any of it, nor should they, by the way. I don't expect that. I don't want to know how the sausage is made. I just like eating it. Right?
Did you ever want Sean to, did you ever consider, I mean, these two guys, they both, at this point, investigative, full-time. They get, some days they're not on that night because they're working on a longer form story. You stayed a general assignment reporter through to the end. You were sent to court at noon, you were doing the snow the next day, you were doing something else. Did you ever want to go to a specific topic and stick with that, or do you like the change that came with being general assignment reporter?
Wow, there's a lot in that question. First of all, it has some premise. Some of the premise of that is actually wrong. Sorry, but early in my career, I actually did do a lot of both, including even early in Channel 12 world. But I was in New Orleans, I was at NBC, I was in Channel 6 for a long time. So I've done both.
Yeah.
And I guess in the end, I did gravitate toward the news. And there were managers who wanted me on the air. They just wanted me on TV. And there I was on TV a lot.
How much has TV news changed, even just in this market, since you started? When you started, you were Channel 6 before Channel 12, right?
You know, tons, but then in the end, not at all. It's weird. The technology and the mechanisms have all changed, but the actual goal, when I wake up, when I'm in the shower in the morning and not knowing what I'm going to cover, it's the same. The story drives the whole boat. I talked about this at that speech I made at the Christmas party. and I stand by that. The story drives the enterprise, and I hope that never changes. These are all just delivery mechanisms that people are getting all tripped up over.
Yeah, but I was struck by something you said to Rhode Island NPR's Catherine Welch. A couple of things struck me, and then I'll get to one later, but that you talked about all the different mechanisms we have now. You're tweeting in one hand, you're trying to write in your other hand, and there are a lot of reporters out there who are shooting and editing their own thing, and it's a lot. Did that start to become overwhelming to you in any way? You weren't a VJ or a one-man band, but you're an active. You're on Twitter all the time, and you're doing the immediacy, I guess, is what I'm looking for. Is very different now, isn't it?
It is very different, but actually I wasn't completely happy with how that wrapped up on NPR. It was incomplete. That was accurate but incomplete, what you heard there. We never did get back to that. To try to clean that up a little bit here now, I actually don't think it's that much of a change. It is more work, but that left the impression that that was a driver for me. That really wasn't a driver for me. I was happily and thankfully spared much of that, spared particularly the shooting and the, setting up your own tripod and putting yourself in the camera. Now the tweeting, it's for everybody now. I mean, it's the greatest newspaper ever invented in my mind. I mean, it's unbelievable as a source. Now, I didn't contribute to Twitter as much as I consumed Twitter, but wow, there's no turning back, and who would want to turn back?
The other thing you told NPR was that in your retirement, you might actually just randomly show up at press conferences? Can I quote you? What?
Well, I know, that was kind of a what. Even my wife who saw that thought, and even later I thought, well, that probably won't happen too often, if ever. Possibly once or twice at the beginning. I did oddly, and of course I backed off it, but I did oddly entertain the idea for about a nanosecond to come to the inauguration of Governor Raimondo. But, the weather wasn't exactly favorable, and it also was too close to this ending for me to be showing up again. It would just be weird. It would be weird anyway. I probably will never do that.
Along those lines, though, and we've talked about this before, the questioning, and I noticed the change in this market, and you probably noticed it too. You've been in here longer than me, but it used to be that there would be multiple people at news conferences asking difficult questions. And now I'll tell you, one change I noticed is there aren't as many people asking the questions that you might ask, that Tim might ask, that Ted might ask, or that I might ask, or Dan McGowan for that matter. And did you notice that as well? And to that degree, is it sort of a sad change? Maybe it's a lack of experience by the reporters. Whatever it is, there's fewer tough questions asked of public officials.
I agree with the ending. The way you get to that ending is a little. I come to that a little bit differently than I think where you're headed. It relates to your question, Ted, where you were just asking, do I like investigative or day of? What happened was, I was one of the only day of guys who knew the history. Most of the day of guys, all you guys are back here all fat and happy, right?
Easy, Daly.
No, easy there, fella. Easy there, down boy. But seriously, there were not as many day of guys in the day of world who knew A, how to ask the question, and B, what the question even was.
Or to wait for the answer and to notice that they didn't answer it.
That's right. And to follow it up ad nauseum. Okay, fine, so shoot me. Sometimes I did, beat it a little hard.
Well,
but it's necessary, and I don't think I'll get disagreement here.
I want to play something here. Speaking of that steel trap, I mean, you have covered this market for a long time, and Walt, in his piece on you, had asked you, all right, what's one of the more memorable interviews you've ever had? And you struggled with it for a bit, but you talked about former Governor Bruce Sundlun. So let's play a clip from that if we could.
You can't even possibly have a favorite moment.
I can't even remember them all.
This is exciting.
What, walking with you?
It's actually with former Governor Bruce Sundlun.
Go back to our history, Sean.
Takes his arm around me. Sean, let me tell you about American history here.
Our charter said the political power shall rest in the people.
And he's just in the moment.
Now,
so
come
this
on.
is about that? We're all the way back to the beginning, right?
This is about that.
And he wanted to get truth to me. And he knew that through me, he could get truth to the viewers.
Through you, he could get truth to the viewers. I love that line.
And I think the point he made also, and I don't think we realized this at the time, says a lot about why, we talked about this as well, we do what we do. For the people, by the people. He brings that up, and I think we all feel that to some degree.
I do.
Well, yeah, that's why we're in it, right?
That's why we're in it.
But are you?
Raison
I'm
d'etre.
curious though. And one thing that struck me, there are so many, especially as a younger reporter, there are so many times you see more veteran reporters when they retire, they write these very pessimistic, unhappy columns or things. You left with an optimism. You would always come up to Dan McGowan and I say, I love what you guys are doing and stuff. So do you finish your career with optimism or pessimism about local news, especially in Rhode Island?
I'm trying to be careful here because now you're pounding me
Why?
on what I've said in previous interviews, and these interviews come so fast.
We
I'm
do
not
our
used to
homework
really
here
being
on
the
Newsmakers,
subject.
Sean.
So optimism mostly, but not, I guess. You know what? No, yes, optimism, all optimism.
Why?
Because the story. I'm still back to the story. You put good minds on a good story, and what's the problem? We have new, better ways to get it out there, and more people, I think, are seeing your work. Your work particularly comes to mind as somebody who you have more avenues. The eyeballs come at it in different ways for you, as opposed to, even for me and Walter, we're primarily TV people. You're primarily a TV guy, although I don't know, you're somewhere, you're I don't know what
Where am
exactly
I,
what you
Sean?
are. Well, you're an investigative guy who's off the air enough so that when you come on, it's blockbuster. It's way harder, actually, I think, to be interesting every day, because every day is not actually that interesting. It was kind of just sort of my job to make it interesting. Do
you have any? If a TV news director came to you and wanted advice, Sean, what would you do? You watch this for a long time. What's effective? What's not effective? Is there anything you think could be done differently in the way TV news is going today that you think would bring in more viewers, that would be more effective? Any changes you would make if you were given full power over the newscast for a day?
What a scary thought that is.
That is a scary thought. I'll go with that off the top. This is going to be antithetical. The camera guys are going to hate me for this, but I think more sound bites and fewer pictures in an odd way. Now, I love the pictures, and the pictures do help, certainly, but the narrative is always what people say. When you go to write a story, what are you looking for? You're looking for the quotes, aren't you? You start with the quotes. What do we got? What did Ben Bradley always ask Woodward and Bernstein? What do you got? And what do you got is what they say. Who said what?
Well, look, and all the photographers would complain about working with you in one way. They would say that he would do an interview, they'd put that 30-pound camera on their shoulder, and the interview wouldn't end. You would just keep going and going and going. What were you looking for? I mean, you just looking for that
I was
moment
looking for
that
the
just
moment that
rings of the
hadn't come
truth?
yet, that hadn't hit me yet.
How often did that moment come at the 40th minute of the interview as opposed to
At the 38th minute. But you know what? I tried to get them on the tripod. Those guys, and we got a lot. That needs a little cleaning up too, I think. Actually, most of those guys, you know what? I know that it's always fun to beat me up, and I take the hits well. But I always
they
offered,
love you. That was just the one.
Yeah, I always
one thing.
offered to go on the put this on the tripod. This is going to take forever, and they like the moving around part. So I know their shoulders. I'm going to have
But it was
some,
a difference.
some medical bills are going to come my way.
But it was a difference in your approach to
That's
interviewing,
right.
is what they're getting to. That others get the 2 sound bites. I have enough sound for my package. I'm done. You would keep going because you didn't feel you had the sound bite you wanted, the quote you wanted yet.
Right, and I didn't think it was memorable. I thought there wasn't maybe an exchange. I'm always listening for, do I have enough? Believe me, sometimes I would love nothing so much as a 5-minute interview. It rarely is done in 5 minutes. These guys, people have to warm up, first of all. They have to know where you're coming from. So some of it, by the way, a lot of my interviews are my talking, not them talking. And there's a method to that madness. I think when people hear more from you, they get comfortable with the idea that this guy's going to be fair. He's just like all over the place, and he kind of wants the whole thing. He doesn't just want the quick little down and dirty. Even a dumb little fire. You kind of want to find out, well, why did that boiler go bad?
Otherwise, why is it an interesting story? And
why am I even
right.
there? And you know what? Sometimes you can, just the dumbest, silliest question. Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Oh, let me tell you about this. And all of a sudden you have a whole new angle.
Sean, we could do an entire show with you, but unfortunately we're out of time. I can tell you, speaking on behalf of everyone here at Eyewitness News, we're going to miss you deeply. Your presence in that newsroom, you were encouraging to all of us, as Ted alluded to earlier, so we're definitely going to miss you. And remember, you always have friends here at Channel 12, but if you do show up at those news conferences, you don't get the first question out. That's the deal. You
Thank
understand
you.
that?
Very nice.
Now
man.
I'm
Thank
really
you very
scared if you
much.
show up because you don't have to leave.
That would be a problem. No, I'm sure the policymakers would not appreciate that.
All right, coming up, advice for Gina Raimondo with former Governor Bruce Sundlun aides. We have David Preston and Barbara Cottam. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. I'm really happy we had a chance to play a clip from former Governor Bruce Sundlun on the first half with Sean Daly, because we have two of his former top aides, David Preston and Barbara Cottam. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thanks for having us.
Ted?
So, we wanted to have you two on because, granted, the Sundlun transition was very dramatic with the closing of the banks. But as Gina Raimondo takes office, we were kind of curious about what it's like to take over the state and what perhaps memories you had and advice maybe for how to make it work. So, Dave, I actually want to start with you. Just can you kind of paint us a picture? What is it like for a new group of staffers, aides, as well as the governor, him or herself, to take over this sprawling state apparatus? One day you take this oath and bam, it's all your problem.
You know, the first day is a lot like every other day in that it's just the tsunami. It just comes at you. It's like those pictures of the New York Stock Exchange on the day that there's a crash. The sheer volume of the problems and the communications, the phone calls, the meetings, the whole thing really does frame it, and it never goes away. And so it's really important, and Governor Sundlun was really good at this. He was big on prioritizing. He used to say, when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And so he was very disciplined about prioritizing and made sure that we were as well. And then he was very skilled at delegating, because as you know, if the governor tries to do everything, if the governor micromanages, and he was not a micromanager, that only feeds into the vortex of the tsunami. And so the tsunami is just a fact of daily life from the beginning to the end. And the way that you master the tsunami is to prioritize relentlessly and to delegate as well.
Barbara, how much does the initial days and months for a new governor, do you think, set the terms of how the entire term for that person will go? We're inclined as reporters to think first 100 days it matters so much, but how much do you think that's true?
I think it starts and it sets a tone. So it's very important. It's not something you can't recover from if you get off to a bad start. But I think it is really important, especially the tsunami that David talks about is very real, and it's there every day. And what you have to do is govern through the unexpected, because that's what always happens. We knew the credit union crisis was there the minute we took office, but what we didn't know was how long it was going to last and how distractive it is from an agenda that you had set. But that is the thing that was most important to the people. But it took a year of staff and the governor's time. And then, for instance, you're governing, and Marjorie Sundlun is hit by a car. And we moved the office to a hospital in Rochester to work for a couple of months. Well, you need to keep your agenda going forward, and not everybody on the staff can deal with the crisis at hand. As David said, it's very important to delegate, and people have to do their job to move the agenda forward for Rhode Island.
What about that crisis? And I'll open it up to both of you. I mean, every governor seems to have a crisis. Sundlun, the banking crisis. Governor Kachiri had the Station nightclub fire. I would argue Lincoln Chafee had to deal with the collapse of 38 studios, and that just sort of overshadowed much of his tenure there. Is that something you can prepare for, the unknown, or is it purely reactionary every single time? Barbara?
I think that you can't prepare because you don't know what's going to happen. The things I mentioned, you wouldn't have expected. Certainly a hurricane, a weather issue, yes, something's going to happen. But you could have an oil crisis. You don't know what's going to happen in the state, in the country, or in the world. Look at France today as we tape this. So you don't know what's going to happen. I think what's most important is communication. And you need to have a continual dialogue with Rhode Islanders. And you need to listen to them. You need to say what it is you're going to do. You need to portray vision, confidence, and then specifically talk about what it is you want to do and why. Because I think that's what's important. Governor Sundlun had a plaque that he gave to his senior staff the first month in office, because like you said, there was not some communication going on, and you're going to start off the administration wrong. It said touch base with those concerned before taking action. And I think that that is good advice no matter what you're doing, because nobody likes to be surprised. I think whatever it is you're doing is half of the issue. The other half is communicating And that is extremely important, just as important.
Dave,
We'll back that up, by the way. Members of the press.
always. Dave, how much, everyone, we must have heard Bruce Sundlun's name constantly last year during the campaign because everyone is looking back to him more and more as a particularly effective governor, they think, in the last 2, 3, 4 decades or so. What do you think he did differently from other governors that is making the memories of him and how he governed rosier as time goes on?
You know, I think that it's a function, those kind of memories are a function of the time and the man. And so if the economy had been good, if he had not had to face the crises that he had, you know, the historic remembrance of him might have been different. I think you just remember somebody differently depending on what times they are in. But he was very effective, and he also was very insistent with Barbara and I about communicating consistently over and over, framing what it is that his goals were and framing what it was, how he was going about accomplishing it.
Yeah, but yet, David, people forget, and Ted is right, we like to ask at debates, which governor do you want to emulate, and 9 times out of 10, it's Governor Sundlun. He got crushed in a primary to Murph York. Back then it was 2-year terms, and he was seeking a 3rd-year term. So is it as Ted says that maybe some of this, the memory gets a little rosier? What happened there, Barbara?
I think it does, but there's also other things. You can be an effective communicator, and still the forces around you are larger than that, and perhaps, you know, that's why he lost. But I think communication is a necessary staple. So you have to start from there. But I think why people remember him is because he was a leader. He wasn't afraid to take a stand at personal peril at times, and that's what's required. And he said what he thought. He broke his own rule about, you know, communicating with others before taking action sometimes.
Daly.
Daly.
But I think you knew where he stood, and he was a leader. He also inspired you. He took us forward. So, for instance, the airport, another issue he faced. He built the airport. When he came in, he had the plans to just renovate the first floor. That's not what was needed for our economy and for the state. We look at the airport today and think, of course, our airport is what we need here to drive business. But back then in the day, it was controversial. A lot of people just wanted that first floor. They didn't want to spend the money. The money wasn't available, they said at the time. Never mind, you know, the Warwick residents and the houses. But he tried to build consensus, move it forward, and explain why we needed it, and then makes the decision and moves forward.
We only have 2 minutes left, and that building consensus thing is one thing I wanted to touch on looking ahead to Governor Raimondo. A roadblock can be set up in the relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch. What's your advice to Governor Raimondo in dealing with the General Assembly?
You know, it's really simple, and it's a function of the same approach that Governor Sundlun took, which is to communicate and just be careful not to surprise. It's just not good to be surprised when you're up at the State House. And so if you can communicate effectively, it has the benefit of making sure no one's surprised, but it also has the benefit of being able to define the initiative on your own terms right off the bat, which is very important as well.
I think you need to build a shared agenda. So find that common ground. David and I would always talk about what it is we have in common, because everybody is invested in Rhode Island. So find out, where do we have commonality?
People might hear deal making in that answer, making deals, cutting deals. Is that not what you mean?
No, you have to build consensus and move an issue forward. So if you and I, Ted, want to work on something, an issue, let's work on that, because we're building relationships and trust. There's enough credit to go around, but the whole point of governing is to do something for the people. It's a privilege to serve.
Barbara, only about a minute left. You know, you've been named one of the most powerful women in Rhode Island by Rhode Island Monthly before, so I put this question to you with that partly in mind. Do you think there will be particular challenges for Governor Raimondo as the first female governor? Do you think she needs to handle communications, her positioning in any different way as a woman, or do you think it'll largely be the same treatment?
I hope not. But the fact that we have to ask that question shows that we're probably, as a society, not fully there yet. I don't think she's going to have any issue. She's a known quantity. She's served as general treasurer for 4 years. She's shown that she can be an effective leader. She says what she thinks. She builds consensus, and I think that she needs to do that going forward. So I look at her as an executive of this state.
David, weigh in briefly. You agree?
I agree with Barbara. I don't think, that moment has passed 30, 40 years ago. That might have been really an issue, but now, she's got a track record, and I think society has progressed to the point where we've got a lot bigger fish to fry.
And do you see any storms on the horizon for the governor right now?
We've got, in Rhode Island, we've got an economy that needs work. There's a constant, nagging, annual structural budget deficit that cries out to be fixed, which will require a lot of work and consensus building.
David, Preston, Barbara Cottam, thank you so much for joining us this week on the program. And if you missed any of it, our first half guest was Sean Daly, always entertaining. Catch it online, WPRI.com. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.